heter Camilla Lundbeney och är tillsammans med Petra Pilava, verksamhetschef för Svensk Kooperation. Dagens event handlar ju om internationella erfarenheter av finansiering för kooperativa företag och det arrangeras av Svensk Kooperation tillsammans med Coompanion. But before we start, I would like to say a special welcome to our international guests here today, Monsieur Jean-Louis Bancel, longtime president of Crédit Coopératif in France and president of Cooperatives Europe, and Ms. Kathy Bordswick, an experienced cooperative leader, currently the president of the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices. We will learn more about you and from you later on. But first, thank you both for being here today. And my apologies for now switching to Sweden, but we'll get back to English in a bit. Så några ord om Svensk Kooperation. Vi är opinionsbildare för den kooperativa företagsformen och paraplyorganisation för de kooperativa och ömsesidiga företagen i Sverige. Och de kooperativa och ömsesidiga företagen utgör en stor och viktig del i svenskt näringsliv. Och det kommer också många nya kooperativa företag runt om i landet. Cirka 400 per år startas varje år. Men vi vet att potentialen är mycket större. Fler kooperativ skulle kunna starta och existerande kooperativa företag skulle kunna växa ännu mer. Men tyvärr så möts de här företagen ofta av okunskap när de söker externt kapital hos traditionella banker och finansieringsinstrument. Så en viktig fråga för kooperationen i Sverige är därför finansieringen av nya och kooperativa företag. Och det är därför som Svensk Kooperation tillsammans med Coompanion har bjudit in till det här webbinariet för att också ta chansen och lära oss av Kanada och Frankrike. Hur ska vi kunna starta en starkare finansiell infrastruktur för kooperativa företag i Sverige? Vi har två väldigt välrenommerade personer med stor erfarenhet med oss från Kanada och respektive Frankrike. Kathy Bordswick och Jean-Louis Bancel. Och det ska bli väldigt intressant att lyssna till dem. Och från den svenska sidan så finns det ingen som har bättre koll på den här frågan än Sven Bartilsson. Som både kommer att leda ett samtal med Jean-Louis Bancel, men han kommer också berätta om hur det ser ut i Sverige. Och vi har 1 timme på oss totalt, så det kommer att bli intensivt och faktafyllt, så häng med. Men först några praktiska frågor. Webbinariet spelas in och kommer efteråt att publiceras på Svensk Kooperations hemsida efteråt. Ha gärna videokameran på, men håll gärna mikrofonen avstängd. Har du frågor om tekniken eller annat praktiskt så ta det gärna i chatten eller ring Petra Pilava. Vi har också tid för några korta frågor i slutet av varje presentation. Och räck upp handen i Zoom om du vill säga någonting och ställ din fråga. Och då självklart gärna både kamera och mick på. Men först så skulle jag nu vilja lämna över ordet till Gordon Hahn, ordförande för Coompanion Sverige. Gordon, du har ju god inblick i situationen. Vad skulle du säga är problemet i Sverige när det gäller finansieringen av kooperativa företag?
Tack. Jag tänkte att jag inleder med att berätta lite grann om Coompanion. För er som inte vet vad Coompanion är så är vi en rikstäckande organisation som främjar tillväxt och utveckling av kooperativa verksamheter. Coompanion finns representerade i Sveriges samtliga 25 län sedan tidigt 1980-tal. Coompanion har 120 rådgivare specialiserade på kooperativt entreprenörskap och företagande och vi består ungefär av 1100 medlemmar och det är allt ifrån kooperativa företag till kommuner och regioner. Och vi tror på och drivs av att gemensamt engagemang och kooperativ utveckling är rena drivhuset för ekonomisk, ekologisk och social tillväxt. Precis som Camilla säger så heter jag Gordon Hahn. Jag är förtroendevald ordförande för Coompanion och jag vill också Coompanions vägnar hälsa er välkomna till det här seminariet. Vi på Coompanion vi märker runt om i hela landet att tydligt en ökad efterfrågan på att driva verksamhet i kooperativt och att våra tjänster också då ökar. Inte minst relaterat till ökade klyftor mellan stad och land, men även som en direkt konsekvens av coronapandemin märker vi också ett ökat intresse för kooperativ organisering. Och kooperativ organisering har ju historiskt och i närtid också varit ett väldigt framgångsrikt sätt att klara olika samhällsutmaningar. Allt ifrån våra basbehov till att lösa större globala utmaningar eller andra typer av sociala utmaningar. Och det är alltid nära människor i lokalsamhället som utmaningar men också lösningar växer fram och gör att människor går samman för att tillsammans lösa de här. Och vi på Coompanion, vi märker nu att en av de absolut största utmaningarna vi möter när vi vill hjälpa människor att starta kooperativ eller liknande företag är just tillgången till anpassat kapital. Det finns verktyg där ute i Sverige och riktigt bra sådana som till exempel mikrofonden. Men verktygslådan är inte närmelsevis lika fylld som om man väljer att starta ett mer konventionellt företag. Och det här hämmar inte bara den kooperativa sektorn eller de här företagen som vi bistår till att hjälpa att starta eller att växa, utan innebär också i många fall att samhällslösningar eller sociala innovationer totalt uteblir. Samtidigt vet vi ju, och det är där det här seminariet nu ska leda till, vi vet att det finns flera spännande exempel runt om i vår omvärld och inte minst i Europa och EU-arbetet på finansieringslösningar för kooperativa företag och sociala innovationer. Inom till exempel sådd, risk, start, tillväxtfinansiering. Listan kan göras ganska lång och för kooperativa företag ska kunna startas, utveckla och växa så anser vi på Coompanion att det behövs ett ekosystem av finansiella tjänster. Därför ser jag väldigt mycket fram emot den här workshopen som förhoppningsvis inspirerar oss olika aktörer i Sverige för att tillsammans kunna skapa liknande finansiellt ekosystem även i Sverige.
Tack Gordon. After listening to you, I think we're even more excited to learn more about this important topic. And now I'd like to also introduce Sven Bertilsson. He's a senior advisor at Coompanion. And today he and Monsieur Jean-Louis Bancel will have a conversation about the situation regarding the financial ecosystem for co-ops in France. So welcome on the so-called stage. Please go ahead, Sven.
Thank you, Camilla. And welcome again, Jean-Louis. It's a very pleasure to have you here at this webinar. As Camilla introduced you in the beginning, you have been a long-time president of Coompanion Kooperativ, which is a banking group in a financial group in France focused on cooperatives and social enterprises, existing in 125 years, if I'm not wrong, and more than 100,000 members and more than 500,000 customers. But you have been engaged also internationally in as now you're president of Cooperatives Europe, and before you were chairing the International Alliance of Cooperatives, and also before that you were engaged in the mutuals sector. So why? What's the reason for your long time strong engagement? The personal perspective of that, John, please.
Okay, I think it's my way of the way I see the world. Okay, it's a choice. So it is important, I believe, in your life to be engaged in things in which you believe you make things moving for the better. That's why I've been so long involved in mutuals and then in co-ops. So that's very simple. Very simple. You can love accountings, you can love finance, but differently.
Yeah, but there is a strong engagement in this. I fully understand that, and you have been working with this capital issue, and I think that it was called the conundrum of the cooperative capital. It's something strange with it, and you know, cooperatives started from a need in the community of a group of people with an idea, but it seems that they had difficulties to find the necessary capital, and from the perspective of Coompanion, it seems that many are very undercapitalized. Either the funders doesn't have enough capital or are not rich people, and there are no lenders. Is this the situation and the impression also for you? And can really cooperative compete with other forms and flourish in this capitalistic society with us all?
Okay, to be short, there are so many things that could be said about that. But to be short, going back first to the Crédit Coopératif in France, it was created, as you said, more than 125 years ago by co-ops. That's important because you all know what is the definition of a co-ops. It's an enterprise which is set by communities to fulfill their need. In fact, that was at the end of the 19th centuries. What were the French worker co-ops facing at that time? They were not having enough money. And that at that time, the question was not capital, it was money anyway, whichever form. And so what they decided to create a bank to get loans, to get money. So I believe it is important to understand that, like any enterprise, co-ops, they need money, not only capital. I think it's important to understand we should not only focus on capital, okay? That's maybe something I would address. Even if I've been part of and Kathy will explain what has been done in the Blue Ribbon Commission in the International Cooperative Alliance, but it's not only capital. It's something sometimes very classical loans and so on. So that's the first things. Co-ops should find their ways to fulfill their needs. And that's why they created the credit card. Very quickly, well, later on, let's say, state backs this process because in France, state wanted to, at that time, it was in between the two wars in the 20s, they wanted to help the cooperative sector. That was because at that time the credit card was helped by state. You have to understand it's not always a rosy position. You have to understand that almost 40 years ago, the credit card collapsed because all the consumer co-ops in France collapsed, and the bank, which was very much engaged in backing the co-ops, also collapsed. But thankfully, the government and the state backed the bank so we could restart. That's important. For 100 years, we only worked with co-ops, with legal entities. It's only, let's say, 40 years ago, 45 years ago, that we started opening the bank to individuals. And that's very important because we decided that the money that the people deposit in the bank should be turned into loans to the co-ops and to the social economy sector. So it is important because there is a whole storytelling, because the money is coming from somewhere. I know most of people do understand that banks create money, but it's not out of nothing, okay? So we need some people to understand what is the interest of backing co-ops. So that's important. Second thing which is important is let people understand that co-ops, they don't only need capital. Depending on the sectors, depending on the type of activities, the capital requirement is not always the same. In services, you don't need the same amount of capital that, for example, in industry or in agriculture. So we have to understand that's something important. Remember that something I expressed in the report made by CA, when Raiffeisen settled the Raiffeisen Bank, he didn't want the co-ops, the cooperative banks, to have any capital. So it is important to understand that we might require capital, but capital is not in itself the solution to the development of the co-ops. What we need the most is the cooperatives' involvement. That's the most important thing. And the third thing, it's not only financial matters. You have to be active in legal matters, proceedings, and so on, because you have to invent new forms of instruments, because the classical instruments made for listed companies or limited companies, they usually do not work well for co-ops. So it's important to have a full range of capacity to back the cooperative initiative and movement.
Yeah, of course, it's a long. It's many things that is needed, but do you consider that the capital is or the money issue, if you want to express it in that way, is something which holding back cooperatives, the cooperative development, or
yeah, it's obvious that money is a tool, and we need that tool. We can't be, if ever we have any ambition for co-ops, which I believe we have, we cannot stay tiny, okay? Mm-hmm. If ever we do good things, it can't be for a small circle of persons. It's not only for privileged persons. Mm-hmm. So it should be spread out on a wider basis. So it's important we use money as a tool for developing the co-ops, and that's the most important, that's one of your topics, for innovation, okay? Because and it's not only a question of money, and there is something special, because we know that the difference between a capitalistic enterprise and us, it's at the end of the story. A co-op, we can't go for an IPO to be listed in the stock exchange. So the classical venture capitalists we know in those sectors, they don't even understand. They're not interesting, but they don't even understand how that could work. It can, in special condition, but we have to be very, very careful of looking at those questions. We have good instruments for that, which are the reserves. The accumulated reserves of co-ops could be useful for themselves first and for other co-ops. And I believe that's something you are looking for in some countries, for example, in Italy. And I want to stress the things they are doing in Italy, which is very interesting. Every co-op, every settled co-op, they pay 1 or 1.5% of their result to a fund, a global fund, to the national movement, to help the spreading out in development in the third world, let's say, in the south for the cooperative movement, and to develop new sectors, new activities. For example, the social co-ops in Italy, they have been backed through this process. So it's very interesting because you can diversify the sectors of activities.
Yeah, and of course that has been helped of the legal, also the cooperative laws and the legal system around cooperatives in Italy, which says that they need to do that actually to fund to the common cooperative fund. But last year I visited France and visited a number, I think it was nearly more than half a dozen really actors in the system, financing cooperatives, business advisors, and different associations and funds working with co-ops, and it obviously is also there is a number of actors playing together to support the individual cooperatives, and that's something which is lacking in countries like Sweden. And is this important to have more than one actor, or how should we kind of think about that, and which is the important parts?
Sorry for just interrupting. I just wanted to, if the time is sort of up and we should move on to questions.
Okay.
So perhaps, Jean-Louis, if you could answer this quite, quickly, and then we'll see if we have more questions also from.
Okay. So no problem. Very, very quickly. In France, our way of acting as the KPF, which is the National Federation of the Co-ops, which I chair, we want treated by the government like the other forms of enterprise. So whichever new systems they invent, we say we want the same adapted to us. So we are not the last in the classroom. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is important, we have to pledge not only at national level, but at the European level. That's the only last point I wanted to address. And of course, we have to find very fashionable topics, data topics, new renewable energy topics. So we have to push for good selling topics. Even if there are other things behind, we have to knock at the door of Brussels telling whether we can solve your problems in climate change, in data protection, and so on. So that's what I wanted to share with you now. Thank you, and we will be back if ever with questions. Okay.
Thank you. And Camilla, it's time to leave the floor for Kathy.
Yes, let's see. Thank you, and we'll have more time also at the end. For question for both Kathy and for you too. And thank you for this interesting conversation. And now I'd like to introduce Miss Kathy Bardswick. Kathy, you were for many years president and CEO of the Cooperators Group in Canada, and also a former head of ICA's Blue Ribbon Commission on Cooperative Capital. So, and Kathy, you're currently the president of the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices. So Kathy, please, thank you for being here, and please share your thoughts and experience from the establishment of the Canadian Cooperative Investments Fund. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. What I'd like to do with the few minutes that I have is start actually picking up on some of the messaging that Jean-Louis shared with the group. And Jean-Louis, it's wonderful to see you. We haven't seen each other for so many years. This Blue Ribbon Commission was identified as a need at the International Co-op Alliance to better understand what the challenges actually were happening around the globe, and to attempt to learn from areas in the world that were actually meeting those challenges for co-op development in their respective countries. And we could learn from parts of the world that seem to be having more success, or were taking more innovative approaches to capital requirements of co-ops. And so we struck this Blue Ribbon Commission, and we actually had three major areas of focus. One was to level set, really understand where are co-ops globally getting their capital, to what extent, and how is this capital structured? So that we could identify, well, what is the lay of the land? Is there innovation and creativity coming into the co-op system globally to meet the requirements of capital in ways that perhaps other areas that are struggling could learn from? The second area was to follow up with some of the best practices that seem to be working best. And better understand what those machinations were, what the future plans were associated with these more creative solutions, and better understand that taxonomy. Was it partnership, to the conversation that Sven and Jean-Louis was having? Were there different ways that the country co-ops were coming together to work in different ways together in different partnership structures? And so that was the second area. And then finally, the third area was to answer this question: should the global system be contemplating some sort of infrastructure for capital? Can we create a cooperative version of a TSX or a London Stock Exchange or a New York Stock Exchange that would be able to respond in a cooperative way to global needs in a far more significant way? And so the Blue Ribbon Commission set out to look at those three questions. And we were able to do a fair amount in the work and the reporting that we provided on the first two. The third one, the conclusion basically was that there was so much complexity in the legal structures and in the business structures and the leveraging that was going on around the world that it would be very, very difficult for us to contemplate a global solution. What we did highlight that there were partnerships across countries where there was sufficient like-mindedness in the nature of the partnership. And there was an opportunity to bring those legal structures into a partnership to provide the capital requirements of a venture that in fact multiple parties across a number of countries could participate in. But to consider a broad, more globally situated fund, we concluded was just not going to happen, at least at that time. So that was basically the framework that the Blue Ribbon Commission put in place. I would encourage those who are still sitting around the International Co-op Alliance table to update some of that information, because one of the significant advantages was that we were able to provide tools associated with capital management to small fledgling co-ops as part of that exercise. We were able to extricate and document considerations for capital management, particularly with less sophisticated co-ops who might learn from the experience of their counterparts around the world. But that needed to be kept up to date so that it was current and relevant to the times. And quite frankly, I haven't followed it as closely since leaving the co-op system. So now I want to bring that home to Canada and to the efforts that the Canadian co-op system brought to bear in establishing the Canadian Investment Fund, the Canadian Co-op Investment Fund. And if you're looking for more information on this fund, just Google CCIF, Canadian Co-op Investment Fund, and it'll take you to its website. And you can stroll through the website and get some additional information, including, please don't hesitate to contact the resources that are working within the context of this fund. So very, very briefly, it took us a long time to get this fund up and running. It was really a heavy lift. And in fact, I was the CEO of the cooperators at the time. The cooperators actually had to finally say, look, our threshold was a $25 million fund to begin with. And we were having an awful lot of trouble trying to get there. And we needed that minimum threshold for a number of reasons related to the structuring of the fund. And it was just a very long, laborious process. And so finally, the cooperators, my board, agreed that the cooperators would step up and supply the majority of the funding just to get this thing up and running. I'm pleased to say that since then, since we were able to get that structure in place, other significant cooperatives have also stepped up, and we now have 17 investors in this fund. And so that's a good thing. That's a good development. But I guess the learning there is that you're going to have one or two champions who are going to drive this initially to get the infrastructure and just get the thing moving so that there is something tangible. But I will also say that some of Jean-Louis' messaging is very, very important as well. As we got this fund in place and started actually reaching out to both large and small co-ops, this fund was structured to not only support new co-op development, but to assist in the expansion requirements of existing co-ops. We found that, to Louis' point, Jean-Louis' point, capital is one thing, but the ability to bring a concerted support network to the co-op system is as important, because oftentimes it wasn't necessarily capital that was required, it was the broader support. And that's not a new learning. I think any of us who have been in co-op development in our lifetimes know how critically important it is that co-ops are able to find and utilize and leverage cooperative development support from elsewhere. But this became very, very acute in this fund because for the most part, co-ops who have really solid business plans in this country in particular, I don't know how it is in Sweden, but in Canada, if a co-op idea is sound and they've been able to put the work into the business concept, the credit union system in this country is pretty good about stepping up. And that has become increasingly so over time, that the credit union system has been prepared to provide core funding to push these concepts. But getting it to that legitimacy is really the heavy lift. And so this co-op development fund, investment fund, has recognized that it needs to broaden its mandate and help to establish a much stronger development capacity in the country. And that, Sven, to your question to Jean-Louis, I think is where you really need to push long and hard as a co-op system, I think, if we're going to have a bright future, in finding ways to engage the broader system, to understand that it's their responsibility. It's not something that they should be considering as an afterthought. It really is a responsibility of the co-op system to step up and provide that broader, more robust and integrated support structure in the development of new co-ops. And I'll end on this note. I am now sitting as the president of the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices. This is an institute that's driving public policy frameworks and helping Canada to make decisions associated with a changing climate and how we are going to leverage the economic opportunities that we believe the country has. I am just heartbroken that the cooperative system is not doing more, that we're not seen as credible structures and alternatives associated with the demands of a changing climate and the solutions that our communities are going to require. And I hold up one good example. To a large extent, a global transition is an energy transition. And as clean energy infrastructure goes into our communities around the world, what is clearly a signal is that we have to have a combination and a hybrid of broad, large, sophisticated infrastructure that is leveraging community-based infrastructure. And if you look at some of the developments that are happening in electric grids, for instance, around the world with microgrids and with smart grids, what better opportunity for co-ops to be able to implement solutions within the context of these new needs, new economic opportunity, meeting community need within the structures that the co-ops provide, that are going to create, this new, more innovative, more creative opportunity for co-ops. I use that as an example. I know it's happening in some parts of the world. I think Denmark is able to leverage local cooperative structures to a certain extent in their electricity transition, but we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough globally, and I don't think our countries are taking the responsibility and the opportunity to build out these new co-op structures that are going to respond to a changing global climate and the opportunities that will ensue. So I'll stop there, Sven, and open it up.
Thank you, Kathy. That was very interesting, and I'm very excited to see also what the reflection will be now when we turn to the whole group. And I would like to ask Ylva Lundqvist-Fried has a question. So perhaps you can start, Ylva, if you can start your video, or if it's not already on, and unmute, please.
Hello. This is so interesting to hear. I'm really excited about all the good examples and all the inspiring information I received so far. I'm CEO of the Swedish Microfund, and we made about 120 micro investments so far in Swedish cooperatives. We need more capital in our fund to be able to invest in more cooperatives. And my question was, what is your best advice for how to get more established cooperatives involved and invest in developing a cooperative finance market in Sweden? How did you manage to get such a broad financial involvement from the cooperative sector in your countries?
So I don't know who.
Kathy first.
I'll go first. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say two things.
Before you start, we have another question from the same organization. So, sorry, if you can just unmute, I think it's that the technology asking us to unmute. If we can just, we have another question from John Svensson from the same organization. So perhaps John can also take his question, and then you can answer both or select.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Camilla?
Yes, I can. Welcome.
Thank you. And I'm really happy to hear from your presentation here. And my question, I'm a chairman of the microfund also, is we can see in our portfolio that the losses is very low. It's about 1%. So we can see that our investment is quite stable. We have a good return on investment. But we can, to our investors, established cooperation and trade unions and so on, we can offer about 2 to 4% in return. And it seems like when we are knocking on the door to private investors, they want 20% in return on investment. So my questions to you is, how do you attract capital from the private sector in order to channel to this important sector of enterprises, the cooperative sector? So that is my question. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will just ask one more question and then we'll answer it all. I think that might be everything that we, have time for. So I really want to give also Åsa Minos the possibility to ask a question to Kathy directly. Please, Åsa.
Thank you so much. And thank you for very interesting presentations. I have a question for Kathy. I work with Viable Cities, which is a 12-year program on research and innovation for transitioning to climate neutral cities and communities. And I would like if you could expand on why you think cooperatives and the cooperative movement have a unique role in leveraging community-based infrastructures to address climate change.
Okay, thank you. I hope I remember how to incorporate the 3 questions. So first and foremost, I will say that I think that, and it was one of the findings of the the Blue Ribbon Commission, is that co-ops, I think, need to be prepared to be more creative in what they are structuring by way of offer to attract funds that may not be strictly coming from pure cooperative structures, but are coming from like-minded organizations. And increasingly, there are foundations and there are private players who are looking to make investments that are impact-based investments and that are going to respond to their commitments to provide additional capital for development that is aligned with their own desires to contribute to a cleaner environment and make the kinds of support investments that associated with those mandates. So I would suggest that, the first question that I think you need to ask yourselves is, are you open to considering hybrid solutions, more creative solutions, perhaps ways of being able to bring these 2 sources of capital in a symbiotic way to the co-op solutions that we're attempting to fund? And I think the answer is yes. And I've seen it globally, where we've seen hybrid structures that have attracted private capital. And to the question around, the 20% return versus the 1 or 2 or 5% returns, that is a fundamental challenge that I think these hybrids need to tackle and need to align, but it's not impossible. There are examples of that hybrid approach to providing creative financing to these structures. I don't know that I would necessarily describe, well, yes, I would. You asked the question about our unique opportunity to provide solution within the context of climate change and the transformation that we are on. I'll use an example to answer that. In my community, there is a church that decided it was going to put solar panels on its building structure. And I got wind of this. I got to know that this was an effort that was underway because I would walk by the church. It wasn't my denomination, but I could see this going on. So I started asking some questions of what they were planning to do. And I got to talk to them about an opportunity for them to consider reaching out to other churches to other similar organizations and create a cooperative structure that would allow them to leverage the learnings and the outcomes and the benefit of what they were doing on their physical structure, but to broaden it into a broader community opportunity to implement this clean energy alternative within their communities. That cooperative, so we ended up being able to structure this as a co-op. And in Southern Ontario, which is a very large part of Canada, lots of people, 14 million people living in this catchment area, there are now 9 churches involved in a similar effort under this co-op partnership to bring clean energy to their communities. And that is a really good example of how these local smart grids and the opportunity to leverage now these microgrids and the smart technology that is now available to the country to find ways to respond to a need for us to move in that direction in the aggregate. We're going to have to do this kind of infrastructure build in a more creative way across the country. Our current infrastructure is not going to be able to handle the significant build that's going to be required as we move to electrification. We're going to have to accept that there need to be new players in our system. And so here's a prime example of a co-op structure that is in fact adding value and bringing capacity to electric grid transformation in a very tangible way. And so I use that as an example of what I'm suggesting is a clear opportunity, I think, for co-ops to be a part of this transition in ways that I think we're not leveraging, at least I'm not seeing that we're leveraging to the extent that we can. All right, Louis, over to you.
Jean-Louis?
Off. I was off. Excuse me. No, I was just telling. I was backing what Kathy was telling. In fact, to answer the question of how do we manage to get people involved in investing in these funds, of course, we work with all classical investors, even our, let's say, big insurers, AXA, because I'm in my office in Credit Cooperative, and AXA is just there. So I see them every morning or every day. And they invested in our funds because they have to diversify their investment. And they understand, that's what it was said, that the level of risk that usually we have in the cooperative sector or in the social economy sector, it's much lower than in the classical, let's say, startups and so on sector. That's the first thing. Second thing, which is important, it's much easier to get the individuals understand and invest in those tools. Of course, it's small amount, but gathering small amounts, exactly what Kathy was telling about the church and whatever, it works. And so 30 years ago in France, Credit Cooperative launched the idea of what we call in France, finance solidaire. So let's say solidarity finance, telling people they could invest in a green labeled kind of investment. And it has been backed by the trade unions. And now in all enterprise, there are agreements in between employers and employees on how to invest some spendthrift with the backing of the firm in that type of finance. And so we now can reach quite a huge level of investment by individuals in those type of funds. And it's much easier to convince, let's say, average people in the street about this than sometimes the big players of investors. So it is important to find a way to work with both sides or both legs on walking forward. So that's, I believe, something very important. Of course, it takes time. You have to convince regulators and so on. But I believe it's a very, very interesting way of doing things.
Thank you, Jean-Louis, and thank you, Kathy. I'm afraid time doesn't allow for further questions. We have so short time, but I think you shared many valuable lessons and advice also that I think that we can develop from Sweden, that we can learn and do something that could be very valuable for Sweden and our journey going forward. So thank you for this conversation. And I also now would like to återigen välkomna Sven Bertilsson från Coompanion. Skulle du kunna berätta lite mer om hur behoven och initiativen ser ut i Sverige?
Det ska jag med glädje göra, naturligtvis så. Vi har ju tillsammans jobbat här lite, Coompanion och Svensk Kooperation och även med involvering bland annat från Jan från Mikrofonden och tittat lite på förutsättningarna för att skapa ett solidt ekosystem i Sverige runt finansiering och jag har haft möjlighet att besöka en hel fonder i Europa. Jag tänkte jag skulle dela lite bilder med och jag kan berätta att jag har delat de här på engelska lite tidigare med våra gäster också, så att vi är inte helt oartiga utan de vet vad som försiggår här nu. Men jag vill ändå börja med ett litet varför vi liksom jobbar med det här förslaget med Fairfond. Och en väldigt viktig aspekt i detta är ju att för en hållbar utveckling, precis som Kathy och flera stycken var inne på, så har det kooperativa företaget en roll att spela. Men sanningen är ju att det är en försumbar eller nästan ingen tillväxt av kooperativ i Sverige, och i år ser det ut att bli lägre än någonsin. Håller det här första 3 månaderna framöver så blir det bara 200-250 kooperativ i Sverige. Och det blir ju inga heller några större OK eller Lantmännen, och en hel av de intressanta kooperativa företagen blir omvandlas till något annat under resans gång. Och vi kan iaktta att de här, alltså årligen de miljarderna som investeras av staten i innovationssystemet, i inkubatorer, science park, runt tekniska och sociala innovationer, blir inte några kooperativa lösningar. Jag tror jag har identifierat en Brålanda biogas som har blivit under 20 år från innovationssystemet. Det finns ju naturligtvis många skäl till att det kooperativa företagandet stampar, men en måste nog ändå stavas avsaknad av investering. För precis som Gordon och flera stycken var inne på inledningsvis så är ju det ett reellt kapitalproblem för kooperativen. Ska det bli någon utveckling så investering är ju den viktigaste drivkraften bakom tillväxt. Det känner ni ju till allihopa. Och erfarenheten från kooperativ är ju att alltså det är ju ingen fördel, det är snarare negativt att vara ett kooperativ om man börjar växa och ska satsa på växt. Man stängs ute från traditionellt riskkapital, man blir ganska illa behandlad av de vanliga bankerna, får säga. Och man missar chansen till offentligt riskkapital, ingår inte i allmännas uppdrag. Och då vi tycker väl ändå att lösningen även för Sverige är ett nationellt system för finansiering utav kooperativt företagande och försöka bygga detta. Och bygga ett ekosystem. Alltså det är ju inte brist på kapital i världen eller pengar, utan det är ju brist på, det är felet att man hamnar på fel ställe, om man uttrycker sig så, va. Och i andra länder som är minst Frankrike och som Jean-Louis nämner i Italien och i Kanada, så har man ju börjat att bygga sådana system där man har lösningar som är anpassade till kooperativ för att slussa kapitalet. Och det behöver vi göra här också. I de kooperativa och ömsesidiga bolagen har ju också en hel del pengar som idag placeras i traditionella kapitalmarknaden i brist på vägar till en kooperativ utveckling. Men en sak har vi i Sverige som de andra kan vara lite avundsjuka på, det är faktiskt att en väldigt viktig aspekt är ju att det finns en stödjande affärsutveckling, ekonomisk rådgivning kopplad till finansieringen som minskar risk för finansiärerna. Mikrofonden har vi redan hört om lite. När jag var verksamhetsledare på Coompanion i Göteborg så försökte vi från vår begränsade horisont ändå försöka göra någonting och dra igång någonting som kunde skapa en bättre möjlighet. Så, va? Och 10 år senare så har mikrofonden nu blivit ett nationellt system och har under de här åren ett extremt litet kapital, om man säger, ändå investerat i över 100-115 företag, och merparten av de här, absoluta majoriteten, är ju kooperativa företag. Och tillsammans med framförallt Ekobanken i Sverige så har ju det kunnat byggas. Mikrofonens främsta instrument har ju varit kreditgarantier och idag lämnar ut finansiering upp till 1 miljon, men det mesta är ju mindre. Och det är en väldigt viktig del, precis som Jean-Louis var inne på, att alltså pengadelen, att underlätta för att ta vanliga lån är ju ett viktigt instrument. Så, men för att skapa ett system så behöver man också jobba med kapitalfrågan, och det är därför vi har liksom byggt det här förslaget runt en investeringsfond som Fairfond. Och förslaget är ju alltså ska kooperativet överleva så behövs detta. Va? Och förslaget är inte en fond som är alltså den evergreen-fond, inte en tidsbegränsad fond, en fond i form av en ekonomisk förening med Svensk Kooperations medlemmar. Målet är att investera i vad vi har kallat game changers, det vill säga kooperativ med en tillväxtpotential som gör en stor samhällelig nytta, och där liksom biljetten som man går in i är 1 miljon för att just skapa den här tillväxten. Så. Och den här affärsmodellen får man ju ändå säga är unik på kapitalmarknaden. Investerare som vid sin exit lämnar ägandet kvar till de som företaget ska tjäna, oavsett om de är konsumenter, producenter eller anställda, eller kanske i bästa fall en blandning av dem som i de nya digitala kooperativen. Affärsmodellen bygger på 100 miljoner i kassan och en avkastning som slår inflationen, som behåller värdet för investerarna, och med faktiskt en möjlighet också att göra kreditförluster inom ramen för ekonomin, så att man också vågar. Så. I affärsmodellen bygger också på att liksom försöka att söka de möjligheter som finns på Europeiska investeringsfonden för sociala företag att få garantier, vilket minskar risken för investerare till 20% kan man säga, i varje enskild investering, så, och som naturligtvis skalar upp pengarna väldigt mycket. Så. Och någonting som vi ser i de andra europeiska länderna, man har ju hjälpt systemen igång med detta, men i Sverige har vi inte lyckats få ner de pengarna till oss. Så. Nyttan med den här fonden, det är ju att skapa en sån fond är ju den samhälleliga nyttan, och med de här 100 miljonerna så menar vi att vi skulle kunna skapa över 50 nya kooperativa företag som växer och som skapar en regional och lokal utveckling, inte minst på landsbygden. Som jag sa innan, alltså modellen är ju ändå på något sätt att värdesäkra kapitalet. Tittar man efter avkastning så finns det bättre möjligheter för investeringar. Det här är ju, som vi ser det, alltså en strategisk investering för att bevara och utveckla den kooperativa företagandet och att det växer så. Satsar vi 100 miljoner här så innebär det ju att genom den här hävstångseffekten att man lågt räknat åtminstone får ytterligare 300 miljoner genom att man löser investeringar från andra. Företagen får större möjligheter att låna på bank för att de har ett kapital i botten. Och i praktiken så blir det en boost på 500 miljoner och en sån satsning på kooperativt företagande och tillväxt har vi kanske inte sett på ganska många år. Så, men vi har ju jobbat med detta ett tag, och det här förslaget, och så ni får ju hemskt gärna naturligtvis ta en kontakt med mig, och ni får naturligtvis ta kontakt och prata med mikrofonden, och Ylva har ju redan visat sig här, så prata med henne. Det som vi jobbar nu vidare, Patrik Kinsel är här någonstans, vinka Patrik så de ser dig. Tillsammans så jobbar vi nu för att förankra den här ytterligare hos de kooperativa företagen. Och precis som Kathy beskrev på något sätt, så handlar det ju lite om att steppa upp och gå in och ta ett strategiska beslut om att göra detta. Och ur vårt perspektiv så känns det väldigt viktigt att det blir en gemensam satsning där flera utav företagen inom familjen enar sig om att det här är någonting som vi behöver sätta på kartan. Så jag stannar där och uppmanar er att investera helt enkelt.
Ja, tack Sven. Jättefint att höra mer om de här spännande förslagen och initiativen. Nu har vi några, men ursäkta det borrar lite i min lägenhet om ni hör det, lite min vän i grannen. Och nu har vi några minuter till någon fråga till Sven, om det är någon som har det eller något tillägg. Så jag räcker upp handen i bara något enskilt. Vi har inte så mycket tid. Någons fråga eller kommentar har vi tid med. Ska vi se här. Eller Patrik, är du här? Kanske du vill kommentera kort?
Ja, tack. Nej, det bara känns det som vi har sagt allihopa här, att få lite ändan ur vagnen. För det känns ju som om man tittar på den andra sidan som bara har gått på avkastning och inte brytt sig om social impact. Nu börjar de här stora förvaltarna kräva det av bolagen. Så risken om vi sitter och inte kommer loss med de här bitarna, det är ju att de kommer liksom att lägga till social impact på investeringar och vi funderar och problematiserar för mycket. För att det är precis som Sven också sa och även Jean-Louis var inne på, även Kathy, att tittar man liksom på risk, så naturligtvis kan det låta fjuttigt med 5%, men det beror ju också på vilken risk man ser. Ser man på de här investeringarna så är det ju väldigt, väldigt mycket social impact man får, men också med en låg risk så är ju 5%, man tänker negativ ränta etc., det är ju väldigt, väldigt bra. Och sen kan man ju säga att alltså, lyfter man den här diskussionen så är ju det forskarna nu tittar på, det är ju att varför får vi finansiella kriser? Jo, för att vi bara jagar och drar upp riskerna i det finansiella systemet genom att då typ jaga avkastningar på 20, 30, 40% om året, som alla fattar är inom citationstecken i en total omöjlig så att säga. För då bygger det på liksom helt andra fundamenta så att säga än att få någonting som ska vara långsiktigt hållbart också. Sen säger jag inte att det är fel att bra idéer naturligtvis kan växa och sånt, men att få en struktur som skapar nya kooperativ, det borde vi väl alla gemensamt försöka få till. Så att, tack så mycket.
Tack Patrik. Det var väl jättebra kommentar och sammanfattning som vi tar med oss också. För det här är ju finansiering av nya och även växande kooperativa företag är ju en viktig fråga för hela kooperationen i Sverige. Och det är viktigt, det är därför vi prioriterar den här frågan i Svensk Kooperation, i Coompanion och våra medlemsföretag och försöka fortsätta jobba med den här frågan. Och nu så tar vi också med oss ytterligare då kunskap och erfarenheter från hur man har jobbat i Kanada och Frankrike. Och det tycker jag gav mycket tankar framåt i arbetet, så det var ju väldigt roligt att få att Jean-Louis och Kathy och Sven kunde dela med sig av det här idag. Så vår tid är slut för idag. Tack för att ni kom. Ha det bra och hej då.